How many of you are prepared for an incident like this? Get my new book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, and I will teach you to think like an attacker so you can truly defend yourself. Don't just react, act. Available for pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Sheep No More. Get it.
My name is Jonathan Gillum.
And this is The Experts. This is Jonathan Gillum, and this is The Experts on Facebook Live, Twitter, and YouTube, as always. Well, I'm not going to stay on here for a long time tonight. I said I might or might not do a show tonight, so evidently I'm doing a show. Yesterday just didn't work out, but we're here. And I'm going to talk about Scott Israel and how I feel like whether it's resign, fired, Florida special investigator, whatever they got to do, they got to get rid of this guy. And they got to get rid of the officers that did not enter that school. I don't think that guy should just be allowed to retire, although they say there's a law in Florida. I'd never heard of this before, but apparently if you're a cop, that you're not obligated to put yourself in the line of danger for people. I'm not real clear what that's about. I heard that on a show today. Of course, you can never tell what's true and what's not. We're going to talk about some other stuff too. It's all very troubling, so let's get started. So as you can see, I've already been partaking of my Friday night toast beverage. I might have to get another one of those. So, yeah. I don't know if everybody else is with me on this, but there is some stuff that's very fishy going on here with this stuff in Florida. I have, from the very beginning, look, from the very beginning of this, there's a couple things that have bothered me. One of them is the fact that why is it that people are still choosing to argue on party lines when the fact is that they say that you have liberals coming out and saying they're blaming NRA for this shooting. That's just ridiculous. They're blaming NRA when the NRA is a lobbying firm for the Second Amendment by people who care about the Second Amendment. It's no different than that. Well, it's a little different, but the ACLU is kind of a little bit more of an operationally minded, lobbying firm. But the ACLU goes out and does lawyer stuff. The NRA does lobbying stuff. I don't equate those two as the same in any way because I feel like the NRA supports and defends the Second Amendment, whereas I think that the ACLU utilizes the First Amendment for their own liberal and leftist personal gain. Now, remember, if you're a liberal and you're like you heard me say that, and you're about to hit your keyboard, remember, I don't like the terms liberal and conservative. I don't like the terms Republican and Democrat. I don't like the terms gay and straight or black and white. I don't see, and I'm saying this, people that watch this show have seen this, heard me say this over and over again, but I don't, there's no brain waves in your skin. So I can't equate a judgment on a person because of the color of their skin. Every individual has the ability to think for themselves and do what's right or wrong. Same thing with gay and straight. Your sexuality means nothing to me. Do you have good work ethics? Are you a good person? Are you morally correct? Are you a badass at whatever you do? That's what I look for. Quite frankly, I don't care who you sleep with. My job as a Christian is not to come into this world and judge, but is to come into this world and share the word of Jesus. And so therefore, I don't even know why we get into these big fights, except for the fact that you do have gay activists. Now, where am I going with all this stuff? Well, it's the same thing with the ACLU and the leftist Democratic Party. And what I'm starting to see on Twitter, I've been monitoring Twitter a lot, is that there are certain people who are liberal and they will debate you. And then when you show them that you have realistic, effective solutions to things, they will say, okay, I agree with that. But what about this Second Amendment? And because I'm talking about security is the main problem here and the mental health issue. So I always, with those people, I'll have a conversation with them. Before you know it, we're having a good conversation. And we may not agree on the Second Amendment, but we'll agree on the real solutions when it comes to fixing these schools and securing the schools, which they're not talking about in the media or in politics. So, but what I'm starting to see is that we waste a lot of time, the CQRF and a lot of these people. Hello, Lenny. Thank you for tuning in. I see a lot of people wasting time on these trolls on the internet because what they do is they have like 6 followers. And it's so funny because Twitter's always talking about getting rid of these bots, right? Typically, they're conservative people, but they don't really go after the leftist robots. These are profiles that are used strictly to get out a political message. They're not there to debate. They're not there to have a good open discussion about anything. They're only there to criticize and pounce on people that they don't like. And quite frankly, a lot of times it's the same person running numerous accounts. But what I'm starting to find out is that by watching how people debate back and forth is you waste a tremendous amount of time by getting suckered in with these people who have 6 or 10 or even 100 people that follow them. I typically don't debate people on Twitter unless they got a certain amount of followers and unless they are having a discussion. If they immediately say I'm a fool or I don't know, or I'm an idiot or I don't know what I'm talking about, I just block those people and I move on because they're just a bot. Okay. And that's interesting because when we look at the amount of time that's wasted on that, we realize that there could be a whole lot more time putting pressure on these loser weirdos like Scott Israel. Now, I've had several different people that have called me when I was doing the radio show for David Webb, and basically what happened was that we had people call in that grew up with Scott Israel, and people that called in that were lived down the road from him in Florida. Not one of those people had anything good to say about him or his brother, both who have gone to Florida from New York. And listen, I'm not going to badmouth all people in New York City, but if you've lived here for 13 years, you will see that there's a certain type of person in New York City that is just a pain in the ass. And typically they're the ones who give and make up the reputation for the rest of the New Yorkers. I remember after 9/11, I lived here as an air marshal, and when I was flying undercover, and I remember how unbelievably awesome the New Yorkers were. You know, if I needed something, I was on a train, my phone was broke or something, people would be like, here, you know, use my phone. And then when they found out I was in law enforcement, man, I didn't have to pay for a drink. They were always super nice to me. So a lot of those New Yorkers have since left Manhattan, but those aren't the people that I'm talking about. The Scott Israels are the what we would all often term in Manhattan anyway, and don't get me, you know, don't get upset at me if you live outside of Manhattan, but we term those people the bridge and tunnel people. They're the ones who come into Manhattan and act a fool. They're the ones that, like you saw these families getting in this fight on this Carnival cruise line, and the ship had to be docked and everybody had to be taken off. That's the type of mentality that these people have. Scott Israel and it sounds like his brother are both like this, and the type of people who are going to be a problem no matter where they go. But here's one thing about New Yorkers, and New Yorkers would agree with this. Wherever they go, it's very easy for a New Yorker to kind of rise to the top of whatever they're doing wherever they go, because just by and large, living in Manhattan builds a real strong personality and somebody who just doesn't take crap off of other people. And when you walk in a room, a lot of times people who've lived in New York for a while, they will command presence because they demand presence. And so you get people like Scott Israel, who's this type of a loser who is kind of got the scummy attitude, and he moves down to Florida, he and his brother, and they get into law enforcement. You can't have any worse type of a person getting into law enforcement than that type of person, because typically I can guarantee you that what's happening with these people that refuse to go into a school when a gunfight is happening, not really even a gunfight, a guy's just murdering people, and they have not just one coward. Now we're starting to find out it's 5 cowards at this count so far. 4 other deputies showed up and did not go in, and when the local police department showed up, those 4 deputies plus the schools officer were all hiding behind their cars with their guns drawn and had not entered the building. So it's a direct, I think if we start looking at this, it's a direct correlation between the crappy leadership of who Scott Israel is, probably his brother's the same way, and these deputies. Now, I used to know a deputy personally that worked for that sheriff's department. He was an amazing guy. I got to meet a lot of the deputies that worked down there. They were amazing men, some women, and I never saw this side of these types of people. And I've found out from hosting on the radio, from people talking, that they said that the previous sheriff that was there was AJ squared away all around. And after when he lost this election, or he either retired or lost the election, either way, when Scott Israel came in, he systematically destroyed the Broward County Sheriff's Department. Now, that's what I've heard from different people that live in that area and some of the people that work in that department. Now, that's very interesting, because all this stuff is starting to play into account with when you look at, for instance, before the attack even happened. Let's look at the fact that the cameras were 24 minutes behind in what was being fed to the sheriff's department. So even if everything had gone absolutely correct with those cameras where they're supposed to notice stuff was happening, they would have been 24 minutes behind anyway. That is a terrible reality and directly related to the poor leadership of Scott Israel. I mean, one of the things that you do as a fireman, for instance, you go into these buildings and every so often you inspect the fire extinguishers. That's just what you do. I was a volunteer firefighter on a military National Guard base, Camp Robinson in North Little Rock. I was a cop and volunteer fireman. We did them both. Full-time cop, volunteer fireman. And we had to do inspections of these different fire extinguishers all over the base. Well, it's the same thing when you put cameras in a school and you monitor those cameras from the sheriff's department. You should be doing regular assessments of those cameras to make sure that they are working to the second. And I don't know what's going on there, but the fact that these cameras were delayed by 24 minutes is a problem. So let's look at all these different things. You got a sheriff who has a bad reputation where he comes from. He has a bad reputation where he lives. He goes in, takes over sheriff's department, and starts systematically changing it to meet his leftist needs and those of the Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Hillary Clintons. He's friends with all these people. Barack Obama, all of them. He systematically changed things. He systematically injures the sheriff's department. He does not enforce policies of going and inspecting cameras or evidently enforcing policies of how you enter into a school. There's no forward thinking. I don't hear of any, I have not heard one thing from either any of these people that are involved with law enforcement, government, or these students that are, don't even get me started on these students that sit next to somebody who's 17 people getting murdered, and 2 days later, 1 day later, actually the same day for some cases, no remorse whatsoever. They're just out there on TV smiling, having a good time. That's a whole nother subject. But with this, you have a sheriff that has a bad reputation where he's from, where he lives. He systematically came in and changed things and injured the sheriff's department. He didn't enforce policies of the cameras being checked a lot. He didn't, or being updated or whatever it took to keep them by the second where they can see what's going on live. He didn't do threat assessments on the school, probably with any other school or any other valuable soft target. That would include malls. That would include any stadiums and arenas, any theaters, any religious institutions, any of that stuff. He didn't. I can guarantee you, he didn't do any of those things for any of those soft targets. He didn't do any threat assessments. So basically, you got a guy who took an office as a sheriff, and all he did was politics. That's what it sounds like to me. Also, let's add to that. I looked this up. Crime rates in 2017, for the first half of 2017, were down statewide in Florida, but were up in Broward County. Now, that's very interesting when you look at the same thing with this sheriff. He's a loser sheriff. The reduction in crime throughout the state of Florida is a direct result of the coordinated efforts of law enforcement. This is from a report from the Sun Sentinel. From the highest-ranking leaderships where our patrol officers and deputies, said Florida Sheriff's Association President Walton County Sheriff Michael Atkinson. The first 6 months of 2017, Florida Department of Law Enforcement reported in Broward County, reported crimes totaled 33,293, and they were up from 32,816. Now, here's one thing you got to realize about statistics. Sheriffs and chiefs of police and mayors, they toy with these statistics. They'll do things like they'll take a person who was murdered in one precinct. They won't call them dead at that point. They'll take them and put them in a vehicle or in an ambulance, take them to another precinct and to the hospital and declare them dead there. I did a study on this. They'll take them to another precinct where there's less crime, and they'll declare them dead there and murdered. And so the statistics go to that precinct or that area. Now, that's the kind of game that they like to play. They'll do things like where they have somebody that where it should be a felony assault, and they'll downgrade it to a domestic dispute, or they'll downgrade it to just assault. And they'll have a robbery or a rape, and they'll downgrade that to domestic abuse. So there's all these ways that they'll play with statistics. If you're liberal and you're one of these liberals who love statistics, I'm here to tell you, don't follow these statistics. A lot of the times the statistics are skewed. I'll tell you another one. This comes from the FBI, where I used to work. I was an FBI agent. We hear these statistics that Comey and all these other people say in front of Congress, and we hear them, on C-SPAN and stuff, and they talk about how currently there are 1,100 terrorism investigations going on at this point. Well, okay, yes, there's 1,100 terrorism investigations. But when you look at the history, or historically, how many investigations we have, it could be around 1,000. But when we look at historically, how many of those actually turn out to be a real terrorist that they're investigating? It's like 5, maybe 10. So what normally happens is that it's somebody who is dating somebody's wife or girlfriend, from Pakistan, or they owe somebody $1,000 in Afghanistan, and they'll call the FBI and say that person's a terrorist. And so now the FBI has to spin up an investigation. They have surveillance on these people 24/7. They spend thousands of man hours on this stuff. They have to do this. Look, they have to do it. You can't just say it's probably another one of these wackadoos, because that's how this happened in Florida. So we have to do it. So yes, it's a terrorism investigation, but it turns out to be nothing. That is the statistic that should be reported. They should be saying, last year we did 1,100 terrorism investigations. 20 of those turned out to be real live people who would contact ISIS. The rest of the people, it was either a domestic issue or it was a fake complaint. That is the statistic they should be looking at. But that's not what they're going to report to Congress, and that's not what people end up repeating that don't know any better. So when we look at these crimes, it's hard to tell where they started and where they didn't. But from what we do see, that crime rate in Broward County was up about 1,000. In Miami-Dade County, report crimes totaled 53,938, and they were down. That was down from 54,056 the year before. Palm Beach, very similar. It looks like rapes went from 3,769 statewide to 4,073, with an 8% increase. Rapes in Broward County rose from 279 to 309. So, and rapes in Miami-Dade were up as well. So, look, folks, here's what I'm trying to get at. This sheriff, who is a complete failure as a leader, complete failure as a sheriff, he's a complete failure to set and enforce policies, and fire people who are worthless, and a sheriff who immediately, saying that he's remorseful, within a day was coming out and talking about gun control, when in fact the reason why these attacks had happened in his location is because he didn't secure the schools. This guy is right in the leftist Second Amendment gun control argument right away. Not his job. Not his job at all. The time he spent at town halls at CNN and complaining on the news, this guy, this weirdo, could have been out doing threat assessments of all the other schools, locking doors, putting sheriff's deputies that are proven in the right places, and then going out and systematically hiring or at least putting out some kind of call, working with the governor so they could get veterans and former cops to step up to the plate and serve as protection, not so that they can run into the school and get somebody once the shooting starts, but to keep people from shooting, or from getting into the school to begin with. That's the main problem that we're dealing with, and that's why we're looking at this completely backwards. So, I could go on and on for the entire program about this guy and about why he is such a problem, and why I think that well, first of all, there should be a case study done on this sheriff and this sheriff's department as an example. This is even worse, I believe, than Columbine. I mean, during Columbine, although it was stupid, that's just the way things were done. You'd get up there and you'd wait and surround the building, do a blocking force, and wait for SWAT to get there. Well, that changed after Columbine. But as I've been saying for several years since I got out of the FBI, officially I've been saying this on my own, as coming out and saying it on the record. The problem is the active shooter response is the way they train is effective. But the problem is it is completely reactive. It doesn't do anything to keep people out of the schools, out of the malls, out of the stadiums and arenas, out of the religious institutions. It doesn't do anything to keep these people out. And so, yeah, the cops are going to respond within 3 minutes typically. But the fact is, if we did it right, there wouldn't be anything for the police to respond to except for a dead bad guy that's outside on the perimeter of the school. So this is what I can't understand. We just completely stopped having this conversation, and all the news agencies, even Fox News, is pretty much covering these kids and the leftist agenda. And, even the president still has been talking about raising the age. This is what's so crazy, folks. They're talking about raising the age so that you can't own a gun until you're 21. Yet, look, let me just say this. The reason the drinking age is 18 because they were having such a it's 21 because they were having such a massive amount of 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds dying from drunk driving. So instead of teaching, in high school, the realities of drinking and driving and how you drink responsibly. I know it sounds like weird, but listen, they're going to do it. You might as well teach it. Instead of teaching that stuff, what they did was the federal government said, we're going to raise the drinking age. Well, a lot of states said, no, you're not. That's our constitutional right. We'll do that. And so the federal government withheld money for roads and bridges, infrastructure money, and the states were forced. I think Louisiana was one of the last states to do that. They were forced to change their drinking age to 21. That's how that worked. Now they're wanting to say they're going to do that with the guns, not necessarily use the transportation money, but they're wanting to force people in states to raise the age to 21. But here's the problem I have with that. We will send 18-year-olds to war. We will give them a gun and we will say, go into this foreign country. Don't shoot anybody unless you follow the rules of engagement. You need to follow a command rank structure. You need to do what you're told. And you need to, very good point, somebody on Twitter just said the Vegas shooter was in his 60s. Very good point. And so they'll tell an 18-year-old, you need this, 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 and this. And you know what? They go out and do it. They don't kill innocent people. They follow the rules of war. They do exactly what they're told to do. And do you know why? Because, one, they're empowered, and two, because they're trained. So I listened to Geraldo the other day. I was with him on Sean Hannity's radio show, and I listened to him saying, well, we've got to do something. We'll secure the schools. Empower young people. He was saying, they're so emotional. They're, we got these kids at a spur of the moment to doing this or that. First of all, we should be raising mature kids that are mature enough to know not to eat Tide Pods. Okay. I mean, if your kid is eating a Tide Pod, that is not a problem of age. That is a problem of bad parenting. That's what that is. So we need to have disciplined kids. We need to stop with this nonsense of they're not a grown-up until they're at least 21. That's bullcrap. My grandparents were married at like 13 and 15, and they started raising a family before they ever turned 18. So you can't tell me that maturity is based on getting over the hump of being 18 years old. The fact is, we raise children for some strange reason. We have fallen into a trap in this country of raising grown children. And I don't understand that. Also, if you have a kid that is nefarious, said the word, or if they're crazy, or if they have, we'll break crazy down, if they're schizophrenic, if they have problems with violence, if they're fixated on hurting animals, fire, and piss in the bed, there's a problem. Now, somebody who has a bad bladder, that's one thing, but they've shown, I have a degree in psychology, at least I remember this, if you have a kid that abuses animals, plays with fire, and urinates in the bed till an older age, there's a very good chance that that is a psychopathic kid. So they need to look at these types of things. And if you're a parent and your kid is doing that stuff, you need to get some professional help. And if the government wants to do anything, they should make that type of stuff like top priority so that they can start getting young people the help that they need. I just can't say this enough, that I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I've been saying for years now, and all of you agree, majority of you agree with me. If you don't agree with this, you're crazy, okay? So when we go fight an enemy overseas, it's not the DOD, the generals that say that's our enemy, we're going to go to war, and this is how we're going to do it. No, it's politicians that do that. Now, that used to be different back in the 40s, in the late 40s, where the majority of people that were serving in Congress had been in the military. They were veterans. Our presidents were veterans. And so they had enough education in warfighting and in military experience to make realistic decisions that that's an enemy and work with the DOD and we need to go forward. But in 1947, they created the Secretary of Defense, and it got political. At the same time, we've never won a war since, and all of our politicians became fewer and fewer veterans serving as politicians. I don't believe in politics anyway. I believe that we should have leaders in power, not politicians. So, hold on a second. So, why am I getting at with this? So, we have a system in place domestically that's the same way. It's not law enforcement. It's not intelligence. It's not anybody that tells the politicians this is our enemy or this are the tactics that we need to use. These are the subject matter experts and they say that this needs to happen. No. It's the politicians. It's their political appointees. It's the people at the top of these federal agencies. They're the ones who decide who the enemy is. That's why, you know, the past couple of years when you've heard ISIS doing this and ISIS doing that, you heard about Antifa beating people up, stopping legal and permitted protests, and they're going and beating people up and causing problems. They were never termed a terrorist group because the politicians don't want to call them that. Right? Even though historically they're a terrorist group, you go all the way back to Hitler's days, they're a terrorist group. So, but the politicians don't want to do that. So I've been saying for years, the politicians in this country are the biggest national security threat that we have. They are the domestic enemy. And so when you look at the reality of what's going on now with all these people jumping on a bandwagon to go against the NRA, and we got to get rid of AR-15s, we got to do all this and that. Majority of those people have never taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution. They don't understand. Majority of Americans really don't understand the importance of the Second Amendment. They think that it's that it was made by men that were fleeing a tyrannical government, and they wanted to give people the right to defend themselves, and because they didn't have a mechanized military, and because people needed to go hunt in those day and ages. Yeah, those are a couple of reasons why. But when you look at, I heard an incredible speech by Charlton Heston. It was on Mark Levin's show. If you were to rank in importance the amendments that we have, most people would say, well, the First Amendment's the most important, but that's not actually true. The Second Amendment is number one. It is the most important. Without the Second Amendment, you will become either an enslaved nation or a conscripted nation, which is basically almost the same. You will become a nation that is subservient to a monarchy or a tyrannical government. That's just the way it goes. History shows us, folks, that those, and I've said this in a poem that I wrote, that those that basically give their freedom away will become slaves by the very people that they gave their freedom to. It's not like you give away these things and they will say, okay, we'll cradle this, we'll take care of you. You know, no more Second Amendment because these crazies did this, or we're going to limit the age that people can get guns, yet we're going to send them off to war, and we're going to take care of it. But as you can see, folks, the very sheer fact that the way that the active shooter response is created is an active shooter response. We live in a world where there's guns. We live in a country where you have the right to bear arms for the reason that we are protected against this tyrannical government. And people think that that's ridiculous. But listen, you take away the Second Amendment, what's going to go next? Your First Amendment. And then they're all going to fall. That history proves that. So the last thing we should be going after are our constitutional rights. Now, how does this all come back around to this weirdo sheriff? Well, I find I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't sit here like InfoWars and just immediately assume this is a conspiracy. But I got to tell you, this is very hinky to me. The stuff that's going on there when we add it up. The fact that, you know, these cameras were delayed by 24 minutes. The fact that the sheriff's department were the first ones to show up and they did nothing and allowed this 19-year-old killer to go through and systematically kill 17 people and wound a bunch more. They did nothing. The fact that that day there were students that were in that school, so they say they were in this school, that immediately came out and started talking about gun control and specifically the NRA. Now, I just don't think that people that are in high school are going to be that focused that they're going to say the exact same thing that these leftists are saying in Hollywood and in Washington, D.C. And then the very next day, you have the sheriff coming out and talking about gun control and talking about how people shouldn't be reelected if they don't focus and stand against or stand with the rest of them on gun control. Now, that to me is hinky. The whole thing is strange. There was no remorse on the sheriff's part. I haven't seen any remorse from that guy at all. I haven't seen any remorse or worried I haven't seen any emotion come out of those kids. That all the ones that jumped in front of the TV that have been on over and over. You notice that there's not a lot of other kids. It's like a real core group of kids that keep getting interviewed, except for one kid that said CNN was changing his question so much that he said, I'm not even going to ask the question because it's not the question I want to ask in that town hall. But when we look at this really bothers me. This is one of those kids, right? So this kid, right? I can always forget how to do this. No, it's the other way, right? Man, okay. I don't know how those weather people do it. Right there. That kid is one of these kids who's been all over TV. The woman next to him is Nellie Orr. She's the one that worked for Fusion GPS. She worked for the FBI. And then she went to work for Fusion GPS. Her husband was one of the attorneys that was working for Mueller. She's one of the people who helped craft the dossier that tried to entrap President Trump that we know is fake. Now, she's one of the people that is the creator of, the grand creator of the movement, this movement, right? And this kid saying that he took a break with the grand creator of the movement. Does this strike any of you as odd? That she is with him and he's with her? And that you had this sheriff who's a complete leftist. You had a complete breakdown in the way that this school was managed. There was no threat assessments. The cameras were delayed. The sheriff's deputies didn't respond and take action. They allowed this killing. Look, you could say whatever you want. They allowed this killing to happen. And now I see one of these students right here with the woman who helped create with Fusion GPS this dossier against Trump that Mueller was using. I find this very, very odd. Now, I'm a trained investigator. And there's very few things that stand out like this when you investigate a crime. Usually you got to do a lot of digging to get to the bottom of a crime or an organized criminal enterprise. But I have never seen the cards being displayed like these people display them over and over again. You would think that this woman, Nellie Orr, would have tried to maybe hide this a little bit, but they're not. And now we have a link between the people who are trying to crush the president by telling lies, unmasking people, breaking laws, obstructing justice, committing treason and espionage, and on, and entrapment. Now we have a direct link between those people and the children that were involved. These are kids. These are young adults. So let's be honest about that too. They're 17, 18 years old. Now we got a connection between the D.C. organized crime syndicate and the young people that were involved in this school that are showing no remorse and that are following the party lines and have been embraced by the leftist organizers that do the same thing as the vagina hat protests. I find this very, very hinky. In case you forgot. No, not that. That's the other picture. That's just me looking big. No, in case you forgot. These are those kids. All smiling. This is like 3-4 days after a murder. 17 people are murdered in their school. Do you realize how traumatic that is to be in an environment where somebody's coming in and killing people that are next to you? I don't see that at all in these people. Here, you want to see the muscle again? Oh, that's Rich Gaspari in the middle in case you missed that. All right. Why don't we do this? Let's go to the Truth Zone. Sorry I started so late, and I wasn't going to do it tonight, but I figured, you know what, I'm going to come on and do it. I've had a lot going on this week, as you know, with interviews and stuff, and it's been a busy week. It got the best of me. So why don't we do this? We're going to go to the Truth Zone. A lot of great numbers tonight. Remember, folks, if you're just tuning in, I do this show every night. It's around 8 o'clock. I try to start at 8. Normally starts a little bit after 8. It never fails that around 8 o'clock the news changes. So if you're watching tonight, if you're on Twitter, retweet it. If you're on Facebook, make sure that you're sharing this show and tune back in on Monday. And what I look for in this show is dialogue. That's why I read what you guys are saying on the Twitter and on the chat room there in Facebook. I monitor what you all are saying, and I do this show so that you all have the dialogue, you all get to know each other, and there has been real friends and real communication from people that have started through this, and people actually going out and working together against the leftists in this country. Remember, you could be liberal, you could still be a part of this. We're not interested in left and right, in gay and straight, and black and white, and men and women, and all this stuff. I'm not interested in any of that. I'm interested in people who love this country, who are willing to stand up for the Constitution, and who are willing to unite against the failures in government. You know, you want to unite, get 100, get 200, get 1,000 people in your community, and just go to City Hall, go to the schools, block the schools. Don't let people go to school until they do a threat assessment on your school where your kids go. And that threat assessment should include the pickup and drop-off area at school where the buses are. It should include the bus stops where your kids go, training for the bus drivers, training for the teachers, training for the staff. You should insist on a voluntary force of former veterans and law enforcement that I know will act. You give men and women 10 or 20 hours, they're not going to become complacent. And they're not going to be subservient to a criminal sheriff like Scott Israel, who should be fired, impeached, put in jail, whatever you want to say. He should be gone, and he should be investigated by the governor of Florida. That's what this show is all about. So remember that, folks. You may look at it as another alternative to the news shows, and that's what it is. I don't cover all the headlines. I cover the important ones that I think that I can dive into. But this show is the beginning of unity for you all to stand together. Remember that. That's what it's all about. Let's go to the Truth Zone. Make sure that you have a nice beverage so you can do a toast with me. And if you haven't gotten this, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, everybody should be reading this right now, and I'll tell you why. You should be reading it so that you understand how threat assessments are done so you can do it on your own life, but also so you can tell your principal, your superintendent, your sheriff, your chief of police, your mayor, your governor, your congressman, state and federal, your senator, state and federal, and the president of the United States. They should understand this. Right now, they are not talking about this. They're talking about gun control. They're talking about arming teachers. But you can't do any of that unless you do threat assessments first, unless you understand how an attacker thinks, and if you take care of locking the facility down, understanding what the vulnerabilities are, understanding the attacker's avenue of approach so you can mitigate those things and lessen them and eliminate them altogether if you can. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. Get it on Amazon. Go get a bunch of them and send them to these people. And, of course, we got the GoFundMe page that helps out. A lot of people actually been given to the GoFundMe page. And I do plan on getting out. I did it in May of last year, so we'll see. I haven't got paid from these books yet. So once that happens, I'll see what kind of a trip I can go on. But with the GoFundMe page, it's going to help out tremendously. Let's go to the Truth Zone right now. All right. If it's your first time watching, I hope you enjoyed it. You are a part of it. The CQRF, the Constitutional Quick Reaction Force, you don't have to sign up for it. You're an American. And if you're Canadian, you can join in. You just have to stand together, and you have to stand against this nonsense of politicization of everything. There used to be a time in this country where when we had a problem, we solved it. World War I, we won it. World War II, it was a big problem, a two-front war. This country went to war. We built what we needed to build. We armed who we needed to arm. We went out and we fought and won. And in the case of Japan, we built a bigger bomb, and we did what we had to do. We don't do that anymore. Whether it's North Korea, whatever's going on in Syria, whether it is the fake Russia stuff or our war in media. You realize we're at war in media with all these lies. Or whether it's these consistent shootings that continue to happen in this country. All of it. None of it has to do with the Constitution. All of it has to do with the fact that we don't have leaders in positions of power. We only have politicians. We only have Democrats or Republicans, left or right. We don't have leaders that say, this is a problem and we need to fix it. We have activists who go after the Constitution. We have people the same people that are saying we have to restrict the Second Amendment are the same people that are saying you can't have security at schools. You can't lock doors. What? You ask anybody who's ever worked in a stadium and arena, who's done special events, you must lock the place down or else it's chaos. In a bank, we don't put up signs saying we don't have any guards here and we don't protect our money. No, they put guards there, they put bulletproof glass up there, and they lock the place down. They have emergency buttons to push for cops. It's monitored by the police. You look at federal buildings, military bases, they're all protected. Even airports to some extent, although that's actually screwed up. But every day, 5 days a week, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of children and young adults go to schools And in colleges, it's the same place. They go there with zero protection. They go there with zero protection because people have politicized protection. And it makes no sense. And the only way we're going to be able to defend against that national security threat, not of the attackers, but of the politicians that continue to keep us from arming our schools and from securing our schools and our religious institutions and our malls and our stadiums and arenas. The only way that's going to stop, if we stop those politicians, is if we stand together and we insist that these places are secured. I can guarantee you, you can do nothing about the Second Amendment, but you can put voluntary security forces at all the schools, metal detectors at the schools. You can close the doors that don't need to be open and funnel the people that have to come there after classes started to where they can only go through this door or that door, and the schools will be safer and killings will stop. Let's take a toast here real quick. And we're going to toast tonight to those people that live in this country, the American citizens. To the American citizens that stand up and say, let's touch the, and I'm shocked at this, that I even have to say this. I'm raising a toast that those people that haven't even served, but they understand the Constitution and the rights that we have, and they say, we should touch those last. Let's see if we can fix this place. Let's see if we can secure this facility. Let's see if we can teach responsible understanding of the Second and the First and all the amendments. Let's make sure that our sheriffs that we vote into office are qualified to do the job. Let's make sure that things like the cameras that are placed up there so that sheriff's departments can overwatch are working. I raise a toast to the American citizens that have never served and get it. They understand the importance of their Second and First Amendment, all these amendments, all their rights, and they understand forward thinking and fixing things. Here's to you. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. I'm Jonathan Gillum. My old buddy Rico's having a couple good days. Nice walking around, feeling pretty good. That's my 18-year-old Jack Russell. This is The Experts. And remember, folks, wherever you see me, wherever you hear this voice, wherever the CQRF is at, the truth has arrived. I'll see you tomorrow. How many of you are prepared for an incident like this? Get my new book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, and I will teach you to think like an attacker so you can truly defend yourself. Don't just react, act. Available for pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Sheep No More. Get it.